Hi, I'm Noel Kingsbury, and with my colleague Annie Guilfoyle, we run Garden Masterclass, which we started 5 years ago to do educational workshops for garden and landscape people in the British Isles.
Hello, and I'm Annie Guilfoyle. We still do live events, in-person events all over the British Isles and also into Europe, in fact. But since COVID happened globally, we now have an online program and we do webinars as well. So we are now a global garden community.
All our information-packed webinars are recorded and they're available from our website. They're pay to view, but members get a discount.
And this is a recording of our weekly public service broadcast that we like to call our Thursday Garden Chat. It goes out at 6 o'clock on a Thursday live, and that's 6 o'clock UK time. We talk to people from all over the world, designers, gardeners, horticulturalists, nursery people, botanists. And so it's always a great range of people and always very exciting.
We've got recordings here on YouTube, but masses more on our website, and our members will have access to even more. In fact, we've got hundreds of hours on our online library.
And take a look at our website and see what's coming up on our diary pages. Everything is listed in the diary, so webinars, live events, everything that we do, it's all in a chronological order, and you can click through to a link to get in more information or to buy tickets. And you may want to sign up for a monthly newsletter, our mailing list, or you might like to become a member.
We do these weekly events for free, as indeed do our speakers, but we have costs, which is why we really appreciate donations, and you can make donations from our homepage.
Well, we really hope that you enjoyed this recording, and please come back and try. Okay, right, lovely. Well, tonight we're going to be talking to Richard Claxton. Richard, you've got your mute button on. That's it. Now, Richard, you and I met on Instagram, really, didn't we, to start with? We started chatting on Instagram, and then we actually met in person at Twopenny Barn. But Richard, it's lovely to have you here. Thanks for saying yes, you do it, because Richard is a GP and so is extremely busy all the time, apart from today because he took the day off and went to Arundel Castle to look at tulips. But it's great to have you. So Richard, you're based in Kent, aren't you? You're in Benenden, aren't you?
I live in Benenden, and near Cranbrook, and sort of halfway between Dixter and Sissinghurst.
Yeah.
I work in Tonbridge. So,
yeah. And you're very close to the wonderful garden of Charlotte Molesworth, aren't you?
Indeed, yeah. I can walk to Charlotte's house, Balmoral Cottage.
Yeah.
I think I snuck in a sneaky picture of her garden in today's talk.
Yeah, lovely. But thank you. So Richard and I we started sort of chatting on Instagram, and then I was doing a benefit at Twopenny Barn with Maggie Haynes, who, by the way, was on Gardener's World last Friday night, for anyone who was watching that or is going to watch it in the future, which was fantastic. And I said to Richard, oh, why don't you come along, Richard, and meet Maggie, and we can meet and we can have a chat. And so you did. You came along and had a good old royal tour around Twopenny Barn with Maggie, which was great, which is really nice to meet you. And then I suggested that, yes, you really do need to be on our Thursday Garden Chat to talk about what you do, really. So I'm going to do the screen share. So I'm going to be the next slide, please, person. I'm going to try and pace myself so you don't have to keep saying change the slide. But should we go straight into screen share, because it's sort of, it goes through your what's the word, desktop. Let me go. Right, I've got to find it now. Okay. Right. Okay. Slideshow.
Brilliant.
Start. Okay. Right. Can you see it all loud and clear?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, Annie and Noel. It's
a pleasure.
It's lovely to be given the opportunity to talk. So, what shall I say? This is me. This is my second garden in the left-hand picture, with me so tying in some beans or sweet peas or something. But I've been gardening kind of since I was about 7. My granddad taught me to grow sweet peas, and I've never really stopped. There was a few dark years of adolescence and undergraduate study, and then after that, when I became a junior doctor and latterly as a medical student before that, I was definitely gardening for my own well-being. I'm not a very sporty kind of person. I've never really performed at any level in terms of sports, and subsequently have actually acquired some sort of injuries, and I now have an arthritic ankle, so I can't really run or ride a bike or anything. So gardening just suits me down to the ground in terms of, if you'll excuse the pun, in terms of gentle activity and exercise. So this is our garden here. So this is the 4th garden that I've looked after, and it's been brilliant. It was mainly laid to grass when we moved in, except for the patio.
Oh, sorry, I was a bit trigger happy there. Sorry, there we go. Yeah.
The greenhouse is on the concrete hard standing where a hot tub was. So there was grass and a patio and a hot tub. And I got rid of the hot tub and replaced it with a greenhouse, which tells you just about everything you need to know about me.
Presumably, Richard, you're on heavy clay, I would have thought, are you?
We're on shockingly heavy clay.
Yeah.
You could literally throw pots with it.
Yeah.
But mulch and mulch and mulch, and it's it's horrible to get plants started. As well, anyone who gardens around here, and I'm sure Henry in particular who's listening in knows. But once it is started, the nutrients are amazing, and so you do get a lot of productivity. I'm also close to Prospect Cottage, a different kind of garden, and that's the one in the middle. Derek Jarman's garden at Dungeness, on what is officially England's only desert, apparently, for those of you that didn't know that. And this is Charlotte Molesworth topiary garden, Balmoral Cottage. Charlotte and Donald, who garden in what was the kitchen garden for Cherry Ingram's garden.
That's right.
At the Grange in Bellenden. And then the genes there are belonging to Jeff Hamilton, the late great Jeff Hamilton. So he was my guru when I was in my early 20s, watching Gardener's World and getting my hands dirty properly for the first time. And I just the philosophy he had of just make, do, and mend, and there wasn't much glam, there wasn't much fashion. It was thrift, and it was sustainability before his time in recycling lots of stuff. So a picture of the Adam Kay book, which is a fabulous read and truly shocking. But that's just to illustrate really my junior doctor years and the stress. We did work in those days. It was before the European Working Time Directive came in. So hours were shocking. I started my first job. I started Saturday morning to work a weekend at 8 a.m. and I went home at 6 o'clock on Monday. And that was without any guaranteed sleep. So it was just, it was truly grim what we had to do. And I'm very pleased to say that, in spite of bad working conditions in other ways at the moment, supporting my junior doctor friends and colleagues, but it was tough then as well. These are apothecary signs from Mickleham Priory, and there's a beautiful physic garden there, and that's become an interest of mine as well from a herbal medicine point of view. I'm not able to prescribe herbal medicine from an NHS point of view, but I do find it fascinating, and the role that physic gardens played throughout the centuries. and the derivation of so many of our current medicines that originate in plant-based products. I've actually designed a physics garden for a school for their biology tuition as well recently. Sissinghurst, this is, I hate that expression, my happy place, but it's one of them. So Sissinghurst is probably the first garden I visited as a teenager that made me go, wow. I think in particular, I fell in love with the story behind it and the love story behind Harold and Vita, an unconventional couple, to say the least, but the romance of their relationship in this extraordinary kind of fairy tale environment that they lived in and they cultivated. And also the kind of the roles that they each played. So Harold being the structure person, the hedges and the lines, the sight lines, and Vita being the horticultural person. So I now volunteer there. I volunteer as a interpreter guide, which suits me because I don't have to get my hands dirty there, and it suits them because they wouldn't trust me with a pair of secateurs. And so I'm a volunteer interpreter guide in the Delos Garden, which is the Mediterranean style garden designed by Dan Pearson and Troy Scott Smith, and looking increasingly beautiful as years go by, although it's kind of a little bit controversial, and a lot of people who visit Sissinghurst don't feel it sits with the cottage garden feel of the rest of the garden. So my role is to explain the history and the intention behind it. Photography. This was through lockdown and through being sort of shut away indoors. I started to write for a personal list, a private account. I started to write a weekly blog just about what was going on in the garden, and it was written very much as a doctor who was having a fairly intense time at work, but who was writing in a philosophical way about what was going on in the garden, and it became really therapeutic for me because I was getting involved in the photography. I was looking at things really closely, and then I was writing. I tend to write sometimes quite what's the word? Pretentious prose. But it was tying the two together in a time that was quite dark for a lot of us, and we didn't really know where we were at and what we were doing, and so I put together a post every week just for my own private followers, and I talk about what had gone this week or what had gone on, in the world. I wouldn't talk specifically about medical matters, but there were oblique hints to it. It was also there was a week or two where I was writing about nature in the context of the Black Lives Matter things kicking off politically in America, and so it became really important to me. And unbeknown to me, it became quite important to some of my friends and family as well, because when I gave myself a week off, I got a load of grief off some people. So I carried on doing it, and just I've carried on ever since, in particular with the photography, more about garden visits now, but and more with a focus on the philosophy behind gardening for our own well-being and connectivity with nature. And it kind of took me into a place where I was changing. I think we all changed through COVID, but it led me to understand that maybe I could explore a slightly different direction than the purist clinician general practice. So what helped me through my junior doctor years in gardening and continuing to garden, but now with a camera or with my phone by my side, I would be able to sort of relax and stay healthier in my own head and my body as well. So that's really where I got to start thinking about changing direction. And my direction changed towards garden design. So I'd always thought I'd do this, but I actually sort of pulled the trigger on joining a course during lockdown. And I do a course at a college called KLC in London, linked with West Dean Gardens, and Annie is linked with the curriculum there from the past. And I enrolled because I work weekdays in general practice. So I enrolled somewhat foolishly in an online remote learning course, which is brilliant if you don't want to go to London during lockdown, etc. But it's not so good if you're carrying on working 4 or 5 days a week as a GP. And I was saying before we went live this evening that the hardest thing for me is getting motivation and keeping myself keeping momentum going, because weeks can pass where you don't do anything and then you realize months have passed. But it's a good course, and I'm learning lots, and I'm putting into practice what I see in gardens, and it's lovely to be creative when as a doctor there's so little creativity, and as a medical student you're kind of rammed into a kind of pathway, wanting to get to medical school, wanting to get to qualify. Creativity kind of goes out the window, even though you're maybe were creatively had aptitudes at school. They were squeezed out of you, and you were rammed into sciences and so on. So it's a lovely part of me to re-engage with after 35 years. So yeah, this is the right hand picture is a plan of a hospice garden. That was my first big project that I took on. This was for our local hospice, and they wanted a courtyard redesigned and some other bits that they're doing, and so I'm on to sort of project 4 for them now. But this was a waterfall area that had no access from patients. It's looking at the chat, it's a Samsung S22 Ultra currently, and it was previously most of the photos you've just seen though were on the older Samsung S10. So yeah, it's a brilliant phone, and I'm Mr. Android at heart. So yeah, so we've opened that up with a pathway so wheelchair access can get through to a pond where people can sit, and there's a kind of amphitheatre style seating, and it can work as an outdoor space for Tai Chi and yoga, or simply for people who want to sit with their family, relatives, be wheeled if in a wheelchair if needs be. And we've got a lot of biodiversity in the planting. Lots of sensory planting, smells and sights, as well as the sounds of the water. We got rid of the waterfall, which you can see was the brick pier on the left of the picture was cascading down into that pool, and it was such a torrent that they had it turned off permanently. So what I've got in there now is we've turned off the waterfall, and we've put in a sphere water feature in the pool, which we're then planting up with some aquatics, and then we've got bench seats on the brick wall around that arc that you can see going round, so people can get in there. These pictures take us on more to the Gardening for Health website. So in a nutshell, this was a project that I started about 18 months ago, and I recognised that we needed a kind of national directory of gardens that do therapeutic horticulture in the UK. And if I wanted to look up what was around my neck of the woods, there was no easy way of knowing. Social prescribers are now in UK general practice surgeries, and so they are the link people who refer to therapeutic horticulture organisations, and they didn't have a resource either. So I set about creating a website, which is basically a list or a map as a directory of therapy gardens around the UK. The UK, not including Scotland, I hasten to add. Scotland has its own brilliant website, which is run on a charity called Trellis. And Trellis is like the national charity in Scotland that oversees and supervises and integrates and networks for therapeutic horticulture. So here you can see the website. So I started out looking at gardens around where I was, and I didn't really set a boundary on it. So there's now just shy of 500 gardens on there across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And it's enabling anyone who wants to get garden therapy, anyone who wants to refer to gardens for therapy, or anyone who even wants to volunteer at or go and work at a garden providing therapy. And it's just a useful network and a map that people can look at. So and I had some good publicity from various people doing that. I'm also during lockdown I started sharing some of my photos, as I say, online, and I joined with in Instagram this community called My Real Garden Community. So Anne-Marie Powell, who had just moved house, or no, she'd just done an extension and was redoing her garden. And so as she did her garden, she would go live every week, and a bunch of us would tune in, and cheeky interactions and banter ensued, and we all got to know each other quite well. And she and Tamsin Westhorpe put together this book with all of our stories. There's about 200 or 300 of us in the book, and we've each got a few pages so we can tell our stories about lockdown and gardening. And that raised money for Greenfingers. Greenfingers is a charity that funds gardens in children's hospices. So it kind of drew me because of the hospice thing, because of the garden thing, and because before I was a GP, I was a paediatrician. So children's hospices rang a real kind of resonance with me. And so earlier, a few months ago, I was made a trustee on the board. And a few weeks ago, I did a charity walk for them, doing just over 20 miles in the Chilterns. And we raised loads of money. So it's fantastic. And they're a brilliant charity. And I'm in the doghouse today because I completely forgot about a finance committee meeting that I should have been at. So, and I said to Annie, there's already photos of me at Arundel, so I can't explain that I was ill or anything. I just clean forgot. Okay, right. Therapeutic horticulture. There are 2/3 of the world's population are either overweight or obese, and 1 in 10 of the people in this country are on the way to having type 2 diabetes. Diabetes costs this country 4% of its GDP, £12 billion a year, and it's a spiraling problem. And it's linked to obesity, and it's linked to inactivity. It's linked to unhealthy lifestyles, and it's entirely avoidable. And so we are dealing with a huge amount of diabetes prevalence, and the scale of that problem is swamping the NHS, perhaps faster than any other issue that we face. Should we go to the next one? This is slightly out of order. This is a slide demonstrating an unkempt area of an American inner city. I think I might be wrong, but I think this might be Detroit. And there have been studies shown in the States about other benefits from green therapies, and in particular community gardens. There's another slide coming, I think, which shows just keep going through that one, Annie. I'll just hang on with the one before, the one with the 2 documents. Community gardens and looking after an environment from a horticultural point of view has an impact not just on the biodiversity of the area, but you can reduce crime in those American inner cities. That's been demonstrated. Philadelphia, for sure, off the top of my head, and also Detroit have actually demonstrated pockets of crime hotspots that have been reduced by actual sort of greening the environment. And you also reduce incidence of depression, stress and anxiety, and a big study showed that in Exeter. So a meadow area outside a housing estate improved on the shared ground, improved the mental well-being of the population in that suburb of Exeter. There's loads of evidence, and these are 2 important documents. One's from Natural England and the other's from the King's Fund. They're both over 5 years old, and they both demonstrate a positivity to nature-based therapies, reducing stress, improving mood, improving concentration and attention, improving general well-being, and reducing symptoms of dementia where people have dementia as well. So these were important documents that haven't really been put into policy in any meaningful way. Should we go on? I'm getting political now, aren't I?
I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, Richard.
Going the wrong way.
That's it. That's it. There we go. Okay.
So this is a slide borrowed from Lauriane Chalmin-Puri, who is, she works for the RHS, and she is an academic working with Professor Alistair Griffiths. They're connected with the University of Sheffield, and they're based at the RHS, and they're looking at the health benefits of gardening. So the slide speaks for itself in terms of well-being scores and stress scores. But more importantly, I think of the other issues around the dimensions at the bottom of the slide. So we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about communities, we're talking about neighborhood benefits, we're talking about societal benefits. And then there are other benefits in terms of looking at reducing waste and landfill if you're gardening, you're composting, reducing water runoff from front gardens. Inner city gardens help with sound pollution, help with heat pollution. Heat, not heat pollution, but heat in inner cities. So there's in Lahore in Pakistan, they've started planting mini city forests, and they can reduce the midsummer temperatures in the daytime by 4 degrees in the environment around the green spaces. And when you're talking of a city like Lahore that reaches close to 40 degrees in the summertime, that's not an insignificant impact. And then we're talking about pollinators and reduction of food waste. So here are some pictures around various projects. The top right one is an illustration from Lauriane's PhD study. This was a brilliant study. It was done in Salford. So for those of you in the UK, if you can imagine Coronation Street, a inner city terraced street of Victorian houses. And what they did, the intervention for this street was to give each house 2 planters to put in front. So you can see in that middle picture on the house, there's a there's 2 planters, and they just gave people 2 planters, and that led to a huge impact, with a benefit in terms of community cohesion as well as individual well-being. People started to talk to each other, people started to look out for each other, and this is all quantified and demonstrated the impact that gardening had on those streets. The top left picture is from the RHS Gardening for Schools project, where they provide resources and educational resources to help get kids gardening. And what's interesting about that is the benefits in terms of cross-curricular improvements, helping with cognitive ability for people who may have attention difficulties. Children who may have ADHD are far more able to focus. Also with social communication disorders, autistic spectrum disorders. And what they find is that children who are less academic, without any specific diagnosis, but less academic kids perform better proportionately, and it helps them level up across the whole curriculum. Because everyone's starting from the same level playing field where it comes to gardening. Then these 2 bottom pictures are from the RHS Bridgewater project on the left, where there's the first RHS community garden in Salford, which is doing brilliant things. And I think that's a picture from Thrive, which is the UK charity for therapeutic horticulture in the bottom right. So I went and visited Lindengate. Lindengate is an awesome place. It's somewhere that's Amersham, Aylesbury, the end of the Metropolitan line in Buckinghamshire, and it's a big site that was given. It's on the edge of a Dobbies garden centre. Other garden centres are available, but I'm not sure. Many of them donate land for therapeutic horticulture, so special mention for Dobbies. And there were two volunteers who set it up, and it's an extraordinary place where they do amazing work. They're a charity, as most gardens are a charity, and indeed is Tuppenny Barn that we were talking about earlier. And so they have no regular source of income, which is one of my big beefs. And they receive referrals from local mental health charities, from people with learning disabilities, and they go there and do sessions of horticultural therapy, and create things that they wouldn't in a million years have dreamt possible. In terms of turning their lives around. And there's also a huge vicarious benefit to those that volunteer there. So I went there just at the end of the first lockdown, and the volunteers were just creeping back out of their homes, and the volunteers are often elderly and or vulnerable from a health point of view. And so it was just lovely. I chatted with one who was just so glad to be out in the fresh air in a safe space, doing something worthwhile that was clearly helping her mental well-being as well. So this was the first garden I visited of the sort about 3 years ago, and it blew me away, the potential that we could have if we set our minds to it. So that's Lindengate. More pictures there. They've got lovely, they've almost done them, the sheds are like beach huts. And just loads of great work going on, and they have different groups. So the gardening therapies been studied started being first evidence was in 1984, which wasn't gardening therapy. It was about the view from a hospital window. So they had in America, they had a hospital ward where they were doing gallbladder surgery. And they had two rooms, and they monitored the progress of patients in each of the 2 rooms. One room looked out on a brick wall, and the other room looked out on a grove of birch trees. So this is in 1984, and amazing data, statistically highly relevant, demonstrated that if you had the view of the birch trees, you would get out of hospital a full day earlier. You would have less morphine, pain control requirements were lower, and you were less likely to develop post-operative infections or complications. And those included things like blood clots and extraordinary data. So then there was other evidence that showed things like a course of antidepressants is equivalent to 10 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy, and 10 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy is equivalent to 10 weeks of garden therapy. In this country, last year, we signed 71 million prescriptions for antidepressants. It seems a no-brainer to me. This is a big shout out for Silent Space. Liz Ware set up this charity, and she oversees the provision of silent spaces. This is at Beth Chatto's garden in Essex. And basically there's a designated space in a public garden where people are encouraged to sit and take in the environment without their mobile phone. So people like me who have it out constantly to take photos of ladybirds and flowers, put them away, shut up, sit down, breathe, relax, meditate, and relax and take in the space, and that's extraordinarily valuable, as is the signage at Linden Gate to say give each other space, and that's what it's all about. I think these are all Linden Gates. This is another one. This is Helmsley. If you go back back one, Helmsley Walled Garden in North Yorkshire. Which is that was the second garden of the sort that I went to, and does a very similar kind of model. Again, 100% charitably funded, and it is fabulous. And I thoroughly recommend anyone visiting, if you're in North Yorkshire, do go and have a look, because they do great things there. This is a picture about Shinrin-yoku, so-called forest bathing. Which sounds more flippant than it really is. There are something like, how many trails? 48 in Japan. There are 48 designated Shinrin-yoku trails. 1 in 4 of the adult population in Japan have actually used them. And they are phenomenal in terms of their impact. So if you spend just an hour in one of these environments, they have demonstrated a drop in your blood pressure, your cortisol levels, which is our stress hormone, your heart rate. And not only does that happen within the hour that you're there, but there's a statistically significant drop in those values that last for up to a month. Us gardeners know all this. But where I'm coming from is trying to get the policymakers to wake up to it, so that this is more established. 2 gardens here. The top one is a Horatio's garden. So that's a beautiful greenhouse with massively wide doors and a lovely smooth floor, lovely rails there, so racks that you can slide your wheelchair underneath. So you can do occupational therapy, therapeutic horticulture, and Horatio's Gardens are, it's a wonderful charity. I don't know if you've ever had Olivia on from Horatio's Garden.
No, we haven't actually, but we should. Yeah.
She's inspiring. The story behind it is amazing and heartwarming, and tragic in equal measure. But they're wonderful, and they're based in the spinal units in NHS hospitals around the country. The garden below is in a Maggie's Centre. Maggie's Centre is also a charity, and and they are attached to oncology units in NHS hospitals. So cancer treatments and spinal treatments, pockets of NHS care where hospital-based treatments are able to access beautiful spaces and gardening therapy. And this is again a Horatio's garden. I think this one was designed by Cleve West. I might be wrong, but you can see you've got an alcove within a beautifully planted garden where you can wheel a bed, which if you look at most hospital gardens, they're very limited. They tend to be centered around a bus shelter with a smoking area, and just grass. And this is just a game changer in terms of getting people out and immersed in their view of the silver birch from that 1984 study. So beautiful. Oh, this is the Exeter Meadow with the reduction in the levels of stress, anxiety and depression in that housing area. So this is my passion and my mission. You saw the map earlier on with the UK and my green splodges on it. Each green splodge is a therapy garden, but they are like Lindengate and like Helmsley. They are areas that have developed more by accident, by design. So you've got a walled garden or a spare garden centre, and they say, here we are, you can use this. And then you've got a couple of brilliant volunteers and they do amazing things. But what they're not is, number one, statutorily funded. They are all charitably funded. And also what they're not is near the centres of population and the centres of deprivation and the centres of need. So the map on the right shows you the heat map for population density in the UK. And the map on the left is my proposed solution to mapping garden therapy to the areas of need. So in 2018, the government created a landscape whereby GP practices, which as a unit are tied to a certain manageable chunk of population. Therefore, they are the areas that they cover are smaller in denser populated places. And we were encouraged in 2018 to form primary care networks. And these networks, for example, represent between 30 and 80,000 people. And they may have a group of practices, maybe half a dozen practices, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the size of the practice. And the primary care networks were encouraged to work together on projects by the government funding certain income streams for employees. So they might say, right, you're in, let's say, Herne Bay in East Kent, the north coast of East Kent, where there's a very elderly population. We want you, 5 practices in Herne Bay, to work together, and we're going to give you money in exchange for working together to provide a service for the elderly, because there's a high elderly population in Herne Bay. So we're going to give you money, and you can use certain roles to do that. So that might be a paramedic practitioner or a pharmacist or a link worker or a social prescriber. And there are these defined roles that you can do what you like with. So in Herne Bay, you might say, well, let's have an outreach person, a link worker who can go and work with people who are elderly and housebound. And so my idea was that if you have a primary care network and you get a link worker, we can't call them horticultural therapists because the government hasn't put that expression on the list of money that they'll pay for. But if we call them link workers and advertise for people who are horticultural therapists, then we can use NHS money to pay for the people who are doing the therapy in places like Lindengate, Helmsley and Tuppenny Barn. And so what we can't do is fund the whole garden, which will have to remain a charity. but what we can do is prize some taxpayers' money towards paying for the therapists. And so this is my idea, and this is what I'm trying to do in Tonbridge. So in Tonbridge, we've got a primary care network of 5 practices, 65,000 people, and we've employed 2 link workers who are now starting doing therapeutic horticulture. These 2 slides, slightly tangential. So the one on the left demonstrates the size of the green space in a UK city. In the average UK city, 1/4 of the footprint is green space, and most of that is private gardens. So that's just a nod to the importance of in biodiversity and climate change of our green spaces in inner cities. So anyway, back on message. This is the allotment that we're using. So this is in North Tonbridge. This is a allotment that was made available to us for free, and our 2 link workers have been just completed the last couple of weeks our first course of 8 weeks horticultural therapy with the first cohorts of gardeners. So we're working there 3 days a week. It's now the best looked after allotment in Tonbridge, and the outcomes are amazing. I haven't actually got data to share with you, but we are collecting lots of data, quantitative and qualitative, so that we can demonstrate and show the impact of this. And what I suggested when we met Annie at Tuppenny Barn was that if Maggie, who I can see is on the chat, on the call, if Maggie was to approach her primary care network and say, if you apply for link workers monies, then you can get that money to pay for the therapists who are working at Tuppenny Barn. And if we all did that across the nation as primary care networks, then we would see garden therapy tied to the population, not to the brilliant, but by accident, scattered nature of my map in terms of those gardens that have come up. And finally, is this the final slide? I think we're getting there.
I think it is, yeah.
So this is the notice board in my practice at work. It's just so lovely. If I tell you that 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of my new consultations are around mental health, and people come to me often at the end of an internal dialogue that they've had with themselves or with their loved ones, and they're thinking, oh, I can offer antidepressants or maybe stick them on a 12-month waiting list for CBT. And it's just so nice to have a sort of holistic answer for them in a practical sense, a genuine funded service that is a third dimension to holistic general practice. And it's a game changer in terms of that conversation that you have. And universally, people are positive when they hear us talking about it. So my mission from here on is to try and use our model of primary care network funded staff for garden therapy to be rolled out across the NHS. It's a no-brainer. There was one health study from Sweden that demonstrated that for every £1 that you spend on green therapies, you save £5 of healthcare spend because of prevention, because of healthier lifestyles, because of not prescribing antidepressants, and et cetera, but more than that, you gain in terms of the environment, in terms of society, in terms of communities and connectivity, and food miles, et cetera. So we're feeding into our food bank, for example, with our allotment project. So yeah, that's I think that's the end of the slides, isn't it?
It is. I've just come out of screen share rather abruptly, but so I'm sure we have some questions because I couldn't keep an eye on the question box. Right. Okay. Thank you, Richard. I do have a message from Arit. She had joined us, but she had to skip off, and she just said, "Well done, thank you very much."
That's nice.
Okay, Ula's in Germany saying, unfortunately, charity funding is not that usual for projects in her country, which is Germany.
And Ula's also asking, she's trying to unpack, is the benefit linked to naturalistic design or nature-like environment, or just green space, or indeed a matter of colours that evoke emotions?
That's a really good question. There's loads of different modalities in which it has benefit. So there are various theories. There's a biophilic theory where we evolved as hunter-gatherers, and we've reversed that evolution now in terms of sitting in front of screens all day or on sofas. And so there's something there about that. There's a evidence about microbiological theories. An absolutely fascinating study was done on Mycobacterium vaccinii, which is soil bacteria. And there's a lot of evidence about soil health and gut health. So, for example, the first study on this, I love this study, so forgive me for digressing. An oncologist at the Marsden Hospital, cancer specialist hospital in London, knew that there was studies demonstrating improved outcomes in TB, in lung TB patients who had been inoculated with Mycobacterium vaccinii, which is a very similar organism to the TB organism, but is harmless, but it's very present in soil. And so this study showed that we knew that they got better quicker with TB. So she used them on end-stage lung cancer patients. Unfortunately, their outcomes and life expectancy wasn't improved when they were treated with this bacteria, but their quality of life was. And suddenly all their mental health well-being scores were off the charts. And we now know that Mycobacterium vaccinii has proteins in its cell wall that actually connect with our brains when you come into contact with them through your hands. And that improves the serotonin concentration in your brain. So serotonin is the kind of happy neurotransmitter that a lot of the antidepressants work on to increase the levels in the brain. So when your hands are dirty, with soil, then you get a serotonin boost. There are biochemical theories, there are psychological theories, there are sociological theories, and I think I would have stifled all conversation had I gone off into one on those. But it's a fascinating field.
Henry's sorry, Richard. Henry's asking, are there any particular roadblocks that are stopping policymakers from taking this forward?
I think there's a innate problem with health policy and with education policy and with most of the public services, whereby there's a short-termism and an electoral bias on what they can and can't achieve. We're talking about a long-term wholesale change in the whole philosophy of what we spend for prevention, and prevention is massively underspent on in this country. It started with them selling off the school playing fields, and so I think that there are big roadblocks there. There was a health and horticulture conference in March last year at Wisley, and it had a brilliant address by Lord Crisp, who used to be a health minister, but he's now non-party linked. He's in the House of Lords. And there was an opening speech by one of the junior ministers, and you would think that health and horticulture might be a minister for health doing the talk, but it was a junior minister from DEFRA who did the talk. There was no engagement from NHS or Department of Health bodies at all. And I don't want to get angry, or at least I am angry, but I don't want to turn this into a soapbox for my anger.
Yeah.
But I've said enough. Yes, there are roadblocks. Thank you, Henry.
Helen has got an interesting question. I'm a trustee for a 2-acre semi-wild park in a small market town in Oxfordshire, which has charitable status. We have volunteers who help us on a monthly basis. Can you advise me how to make contact with my local health practice so we can get patients to volunteer with us? We don't have a qualified therapist, but we do have qualified horticulturalists.
Oh, okay. There's a boring governance answer to that question, which I'll dispense with, except to say explore Thrive for therapeutic horticulture courses. They do some good courses online, and they're a good place to start. And they do touch on the governance and indemnity aspects here, because those aren't insubstantial. And there's a happier, more person-focused answer to that question, which is simply contact the GP surgeries, ask for who are the social prescribers and who are the PCN leads, and get the link workers to start publishing, the social prescribers to start publicizing your existence and your need for volunteers. And if not through the link workers and the social prescribers, then each practice should have a patient participation group, which tend to be populated by really enthusiastic volunteer type people. That sounds more prejudicial than I meant it to.
Yeah. Richard, can you just explain what's the process of social prescribing? Can you explain, what you'd say and how you do it, and then how does somebody then take that up? What's the procedure?
I suppose it sort of stems from what David Cameron started talking about 15 years ago, about big society. It's a mobilization of the third sector, charitable bodies, communities, in a very generic way to help meet a need that may not be being met by statutory services, be that because they don't exist or they're not funded, or a combination of the two. And so as a result of that, the social prescribing roles are one of these key PCN roles that developed. And there's a brilliant organisation called the National Academy of Social Prescribers, and they've helped me with my project, and I'm involved with some of their developments and plans looking forward to how we can create national bodies, etc. But in a nutshell, the idea is that if you were to come and see me about problems to do with your life, to do with your health, to do with your mental health or physical health, they might be specific physical or mental illnesses, or they might simply be isolation, then it's a way that we think differently in terms of a conventional medical model. So we might start to think about the inherent causes into your isolation or your mental health, and then we might start to think about what we can do. So, for example, a good example about this is choirs for people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They're becoming more commonplace, and they're completely unconventional medicine, but they have a phenomenal impact, not just in terms of social cohesion and connectivity, but also in terms of respiratory function for people who are struggling with breathing. So the sadness for me is that if I write a prescription for Prozac, that creates a money trail for the pharmaceutical industry from the NHS, so that the pharmacist gets a bit of money for that, and the pharmaceutical industry that made it gets a bit of money for that. And then if they pay for the prescriptions, then the government gets a bit of money for that. But with a social prescription, there is no financial transaction whatsoever. it's a little bit of a con in that respect from a government point of view, because it doesn't carry any price tag. So if I was a local GP to Maggie's organisation, Tuppenny Barn, and I made a social prescription to Tuppenny Barn would receive nothing to pay for that activity. And that's why Tuppenny Barn relies on charity for fundraising. And so at least if we can get the PCN roles rolled out in terms of these link workers doing the therapeutic horticulture, then we'll at least be able to pay for the salary. And that's a big chunk of what Maggie's expenses are month on month, is paying for the therapist. By no means all of it, but it would help, and it would create a philosophical statement from the Department of Health to say we want to put our money where this evidence lies, because it's really important.
I think Maggie, do you want to turn your speaker on? Just to say, I mean, congratulations on the piece on Gardener's World, because that was fantastic. And what sort of feedback have you had during this last week since that?
It's been fantastic, Annie, thank you. Yes, from all quarters and actually from all around the country. People posting comments saying they think it's a wonderful project. I've had few parents ring up wanting to know whether there are young carers projects in other parts of the country, and sadly I don't know of any, which was quite sad. But asked them to talk to their local councils to deal with that. But yes, it's been very positive. And a great boost for the team there. And I suppose one of my head gardener, Helen, put a post up herself to say, despite sometimes the pressures that we're under, the work that we have to do, the little resources, it just reminded us of why we exist for the clients. And the Young Carers project is a green therapy, and we do a lot of evaluation, and it's nearly in its third year now, and we've had some amazing results. So yeah, I mean it was great, and very grateful that we got that platform. But Richard, that was I'm so sorry I came late, but really very interested in what you're having to say, and it's just so inspiring to know somebody's taking up the mantle to try and do something about it, because I can't overemphasize the fact that we are a charity, that we have to raise the money for these services, despite the fact the social prescribers are signposting clients to us. We actually have to find the funds. We are quite cheap in what we actually do. And then if you look at the output and the evaluation, I think if more of us, perhaps where we do have these projects, can get together perhaps with the evidence and just keep pushing, because I think that needs to be done. And certainly if we could have our therapists funded, that would take a huge amount of pressure off the charity, because there's lots more that we want to do and other projects, but it's a constant battle. Knowing that every year that we have to reapply and try and find funds from somewhere to pay the therapists, because that's really just the main cost of the project once you've got the infrastructure there.
Yeah, I mean, if people, and also just to remind people, if they haven't seen the Maggie's piece on Gardener's World, it was on at about sort of, I don't know, 35 minutes into the programme last Friday, if you catch it on iPlayer. And I know in the States, I think you can watch it in some shape or form. I know people do watch it, but it was featuring it was particularly, because your Tuppenny Barn is quite broad, but it was particularly focused on a young carers group that you have every week. So yeah, it was definitely worth watching, and I'm glad it was you know, well received and brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
I would echo that. I think it was the most edge of my seat bit on the Gardener's World programme I've seen in a very long time. completely very moving and inspiring.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I know we could chat on all evening, but we shouldn't really. We should wrap up. But Richard, one thing I did want to say, Richard, is do you go to parties?
Not as often as I used to.
No, because I'm imagining, because you're a GP and you're a gardener. Isn't that the worst possible thing to be at a party? Because people are going to get you in a corner and they're either they're either going to ask you about their dying hydrangea or their lump on their neck or something. So I mean, do you just sort of say you're, I don't know, a plumber if you go out? I mean,
Oddly, it's a really good question. People do tend to gravitate towards the general practice, unfortunately. So I'd much rather talk to them about their hydrangeas than their unusual rashes or toenails.
Lovely, lovely. Well, listen, Richard, thank you ever so much for putting all of that together today, because it's been really, really interesting, and I think it will open up more talk and debate. And I know that we want to get together with Maggie and organise something as well for the future. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That was
brilliant. And thanks Maggie for making it. Yeah, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and spread the word, really. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Okay. It's a pleasure. Take care. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.